Today I'm with the author of this list, and it's called The Thousanders. That's the original manuscript, and it's been updated, and this is how it stands today. And the author of that hill list is John Kirk. Hello John, how are you?
Hi Myrddyn, fine, thank you very much indeed.
Well done John. Well, I think for the purposes of this interview, John, we'll concentrate on the Thousanders in all its wonderful detail,
Right.
because it's quite a unique concept for a hill list. But before we start going into detail concerning the Thousanders, it would be quite nice to just lay a little bit of background about yourself. And if we take you back to your younger days, where did you grow up?
I grew up in East Lancashire. I was born in Colne and lived in that area of East Lancashire right through to going to university in the late 1960s.
And what about discovering the hills? How old were you?
Oh, probably in the late 1950s. I'd probably be 8 or 9 or 10 when my father would start bringing me to Yorkshire, Lake District, and I certainly got a great fascination with hills. I really wanted to know about hills, wanted to know anything about them, and again there was a difficulty in coming across literature at that time.
Now, as far as you mentioned your father and how you discovered the hills, but of course that just wasn't hill walking either at a young age. I believe when you were quite young you compiled your first hill list?
I did. I'd probably be 13, 1964, when I compiled my first list, which was the hills in England over 2,000 feet. There were at that time hill lists in existence, but I couldn't find them. So basically I was starting from scratch. So I'd used what material I could find, looked at old maps, or maps of the time, and developed the list.
So presumably that was the pure compulsion to do it, because
It was it, yeah.
because that's an incredible age to start hill list compiling.
And not only that, by the time I was 15, I completed it.
And that's all the English 2,000 footers
that
that you...
English 2,000 footers.
How many were there in that list?
That list was 274 summits, but looking back at that list now with hindsight, it's the things that influence you, like the size of font on the map, or other people's lists, or what's in other people's books, like Wainwright, for example. So influenced by other things. So clearly you needed criteria, hard and fast criteria, which again at the time was difficult to come by.
Now, if we bring it forward a few more years, because your hill list compilation is it's probably been with you ever since, hasn't it?
It has indeed, yeah.
And I know you've done many, many lists as of more recent years, but certainly one that I believe preceded the Thousanders. Was that Kirk's Big Mountain list?
It was, yeah. And that was a question of collecting, trawling maps basically, trawling the better quality later series Ordnance Survey maps and trawling them to find all summits in excess of 500 metres where there was 20 metres of relative height or drop, depending on how you want to call it, which again is a very complicated definition, which I'm sure you'll come to on other videos elsewhere, but it was compiling that list, which was quite substantial. Well,
I know you've been very kind, John, in the past to drop lists off for me, which I've been ever so grateful for. I think Kirk's Big Mountain list deserves a whole interview just on its own, so thanks for detailing that a little bit. But right. Now, after that, how soon after Kirk's Big Mountain list did the Thousanders?
Probably within 6 months. Having got that list, it was then a question of saying I want a list of the best British mountains. So you go through the list, I highlight those which I know to be hills that I like to climb, hills I would give a large subjective score to in terms of quality hills to climb, and then find out what criteria they have in common. And clearly generally the higher the mountain the better they are, but not absolutely. The greater the relative height and drop the mountains have, the better they are, but not absolutely. So I tried a combination or combinations of those numbers, and lo and behold I got a list which I was quite pleased with.
Now, of course, you're talking about the two main objective criterion that are used, which is the combination of absolute height and relative height.
Yeah.
Now, to my knowledge, that's the first time it's ever been done, and except for yourself, it's never been done by anybody else. But it's an incredible concept.
Well, there are absolute height lists which have a relative height qualification. There are relative height lists, but to have the two together, it worked, but also had to bring in a minimum relative height figure of 100 metres or 10% in order to get rid of bits of dross which I didn't actually want in the list. So that then reduced it eventually to the current figure of 706.
Now, if we just go back to the criteria used again, of course, what the reason for the title 1000 is, it's if a specific hill has a certain absolute height,
Yep.
and it's plus its relative height, and that must equal,
Or greater than,
yeah,
well, 1,000.
1,000.
1,000 metres, and also the minimum relative height figure of 100 metres again cuts out little tiny bumps on higher mountains.
What about the land area that the 1000ers take in?
The land area.
Well, as far as the countries are
Oh
concerned.
yes, one of the perhaps criticisms of the 1000 list is it's very Scottish heavy. So, for example, Wales has 29, England 28. So there you go, a win for Wales by 1.
Hooray!
The Isle of Man has 1, and the island of Ireland has 70, form like a ring around the edge of the island of Ireland, which are quite impressive mountains, worth going to look at. However, that leaves a minor matter of 578 that happen to be in Scotland. So again, it is Scottish heavy. The Munros feature very heavily, the Corbetts feature very heavily. So it is a list based on that issue of height plus relative height, giving obviously Scotland, particularly the Highlands, an advantage over the rest of Britain. And in fact, that is why we come up with the 650 list, which is England and Wales only, which looks to try to create a similar sort of concept within England and Wales. But that's a subject for possibly another video at another time.
Well, I know in the latest manuscript, John, that you got of the 1000ers, you've also on the title page got the 650ers, so presumably that manuscript includes those two listings.
It does indeed, yes.
Yeah, well again, it's certainly good for a future video. Now, as far as the 1000ers are concerned, that was completed as far as the compilation was concerned in
1997.
Now, there has been updates ever since?
Yeah, there's been quite regular updates. The original list, I think, was 703. And then with help from other mountaineers who scrutinised the list, it crept up to 709. And then with other revisions and changes, it slowly crept back down again to 706. So that's where it is today, and it's been there for probably 5 or 6 years. So I think it's fairly accurate. It's fairly good data in there now.
Any idea how many people have actually been to the summit of every 1000er?
So far I only know 1.
I wonder who that is.
And I wonder who that is, yeah. That Woodall character again.
It's Mr. Woodall. Good on Rob. Now, as far as the hill list as it is, John, it, I believe, remains unpublished?
It remains unpublished, yeah. But if anybody wants one, I will gladly supply electronic copy.
And how should they contact you?
By email, and it's john.kirk284 at ntlworld.com. And the 284 was the number of Munros, and it's now 283. But however, 284 is the email address.
Well, still officially 283, but it should be 282.
Oh, we've not been measuring again, have we? Oh dear.
Well, that could be for a future video. But I also know, John, that having looked at this hill list again, I think it's a marvellous concept. I'd sort of described it as quite simple in its concept, but quite ingenious. And it would be lovely if it was published. I think it's very kind of you offering that if people are interested in receiving a copy via attachment via email. That's ever so good of you. But have you got any plans to try to get it published at all?
I might do at some point. I'm happy with the data now. That's the key thing. I'm not actually putting something in for publication which is eligible for scrutiny. It will result in too many promotions and demotions. The 706 looks good. And
how are you getting through the list? What's your total at the moment?
I'm in the low 500s only, but I'm quietly working the numbers up.
Because of course you're a Munroist, aren't you?
I am a Munroist, yeah. Yet another list in the collection. But in recent times I've been concentrating on lesser lists, like knocking off the Deweys and Hewitts of England and Wales, which is coming to an end. That should get both lists sometime in 2012.
So if we just, for the end part, John, just come back to the Thousanders. I know I've asked you the question about possible publication. I know I'd sort of tried to push you towards it. I also know this day and age people do or have started producing e-versions of hill lists. Have you ever considered that for the Thousanders?
That's a possibility. Have I actually done anything about it? No. I need to move myself, don't I?
Well, John, again, I'd recommend anybody to contact John to try to get a copy of the Thousanders. It's a superb hill list. So, John Kirk, for now, been lovely meeting you, and many thanks.
Thank you, Myrddyn.